Welcome. My name is Brenda Suggett, and I'm the Executive Director of CARSP, and welcome to today's webinar. It is entitled Designing Safe Systems, Vision Zero from Policy to Practice with Amar Ladd, and I will introduce him in a moment. Right now, I'd like to thank our sponsor, which is Transport Canada, who's given us funding to be able to put on these webinars. And I also would like to make you aware of an upcoming webinar in the new year. It's going to be on January the 18th, and it's measuring the impact of drug-impaired driving, recommendations for national indicators. It's by Shauna Meister at CCASA. And once again, it's January 18th at 12 o'clock. And before I get started, I wanted to share some housekeeping information. Basically, that the presentation will proceed before questions, so questions will be left until the end. And we ask that you submit your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom. You feel free to use chat to chat amongst yourselves, but if you could restrict your questions to Q&A, and you can submit them at any time, and we will answer them, though, at the end. So without further ado, I'd now like to do an introduction to our today's speaker. And his name is Amar Ladd. He is the mobility planner at TY Lin. Amar has experience in a wide-ranging transportation planning studies for both the public and private sector. His passion for safe and complete communities, tied with engagement and data-supported trends in mobility, enable him to develop innovative and forward-thinking solutions for communities of all sizes. Amar's background in transportation planning includes experience in Vision Zero and road safety, multimodal and traffic engineering, land use planning and development, urban design, transportation demand management, urban renewal, and governance. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Amar. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Brenda, and to everyone at CARSP, Navoda, Brenda, everybody who's helped organize this. I really appreciate the opportunity. And it's great to see so many people already logging on and joining us for today's session. I do want to say, please, let's keep this interactive, keep your comments and questions flowing. Like Brenda said, we'll answer the questions at the end, but do stay engaged and let's make this a great hour. So I'll share my screen and we can get started. So as Brenda said, the topic for today is designing safe systems, Vision Zero from policy to practice. Personally, I'm a mobility planner at TY Lin and actively engaged in road safety planning and Vision Zero. And I'm not a full-out expert by any means. Everyone like myself, we all have a lot to learn. So if I do miss anything, please do go ahead and share. I hope this session can be engaging and informative for all of us, myself included. So please do feel free to give your input throughout and after the fact. So just to get started, it would be great to know who all we have on the call today. Like what profession, sector do you represent? Are you in the private sector, public sector, nonprofit, and in academia? It'll be great to know who we're talking to here today, since I can't see anybody's faces or names. So I know Navoda has a poll ready. So if you want to pop that on, and then yeah, we can just take a minute, everybody plop in your answers, and then we'll continue.
Yeah, Amar, the poll is actually not for this one, for the Vision Zero one.
Oh, okay, no problem. So maybe use the chat function, folks. Where are you guys from? So we've got Jeff from the city of Windsor. Fantastic. Just go ahead and pop that chat box open. Let me know where you're from, what your background's like. That's fantastic. From Saskatchewan, Ministry of Highways. Awesome. Thank you, Jeffrey. We got Natalia from public sector, Ian from Windsor, traffic. Fantastic. Welcome. We've got some students from Waterloo and TMU. Fantastic. More from Windsor. Windsor is really engaged today. This is great to see. Transport Canada. Okay, now this is flowing through really quickly. I see University of Manitoba. More students from TMU and BC. Well, this is fantastic. So welcome everybody. It's great to see that we have representation from all across Canada. Saskatchewan here, BC Ministry of Transportation. This is fantastic. So I think we should have a really great conversation today. And I hope this can touch on all of your jurisdictions and experiences. So then the next question, and this one is the one we have the poll. How familiar are you with Vision Zero? So just to kind of influence how kind of detailed we get into the conversation. Are you very familiar generally? Are you just kind of learning more about the topic and what Vision Zero is all about? Is this something you work on your day-to-day in your profession? Or is this completely new to you? So if you can go ahead and answer the poll. Go ahead and join you. And Devota, can we see the results?
Yeah.
Okay, so pretty good range here. All right, so I hope this session, for those who are very familiar with Vision Zero, I hope this is informative for you. I hope we can both learn from each other as we go through, and for everyone else, I hope you can take something away and apply this to your fields. So thank you all for participating and stay engaged again through the presentation. So just to kind of set the stage, I'm here to talk about how we can design safe systems using Vision Zero principles. The context of our talk surrounds our roadways across Canada. So rural roadways, suburban roadways, urban roadways. And the reason is we have a crisis of collisions, crisis of accidents. And the fact of the matter is that every person who's lost their lives on our streets are really victims of a world that we've built that prioritizes the speed and efficiency of private automobiles over the safety of all users. It sounds exaggerated, but all of these tragedies really are preventable situations. We often put the onus on drivers to drive slower, navigate the system, other users, and a lot of onus is put on drivers, but there needs to be a responsibility on the system as a whole and how we design roadways that allow collisions like this to occur, rather than designing them to prevent collisions in the first place. Each situation, in my opinion, is really a failure of how we design our cities and our roadway infrastructure and our priorities. So why does this keep happening? Like I said, it's because our roads are designed to move as many vehicles as possible, as quickly as possible through our communities. We're limited by a lack of good quality data, and at the end of the day, what doesn't get measured doesn't get addressed, right? So that limits our capabilities to actually address the things based on how we tackle challenges, how we respond to crises, and how we transform our environment to prevent these from happening over and over and over. So this lack of success is really tied to the mentality of it's almost inevitable, but it's also tied to a lack of monitoring of solutions after implementation. So I'll touch on that later in the session. But in short, like it says here on the screen, accidents, or I should be saying collisions, are considered an inevitable consequence of mobility. And that's why this keeps happening over and over, because we just accepted it as the status quo. So does this have to be this way? No. The short answer is no. If we do things differently, if we design things differently, if we build things differently, then this doesn't have to be the end result. And we can see examples from European leaders in Vision Zero, where multiple cities like Oslo and others have achieved zero traffic deaths, zero deaths and severe injuries from roadway collisions over the last few years because of the investments they've made in their communities. And in closer to home, in a North American example, I can reference Hoboken in New Jersey, where over the last 4 years, they've had no deaths on their roadways. And I apologize, it might not be 4 years, maybe 3 years. Don't quote me on the statistic off the top of my head. But again, they put in the investment, they put in the time, the effort to transform their intersections, transform their roadways to prevent these deaths from happening. And we can do the same in Canada. So what can we do? We need to redesign our roads, reallocate the space we have on our roads, reinvest in alternatives, and kind of as a package, we're reprioritizing human lives. I think somewhere over the last few decades that's got lost in the discussion of transportation planning, engineering, road design, and it really needs to be bumped back to the top. These, again, like I said, these tragedies are not an inevitable consequence of our built environment, and they can be mitigated using a safe systems approach based on Vision Zero principles. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. We essentially need to accept that human mistakes are inevitable, but good transportation planning can help ensure that they aren't fatal. So what is Vision Zero? For those who are still new to the topic, learning a little bit more, Vision Zero is a transformative global strategy for rethinking roadway safety with the goal to eliminate deaths and serious injuries from our transportation system. The program really emphasizes a multi-pronged approach that starts with design and policy rather than traditional education, enforcement, and engineering. So let me say that again. It starts with design and policy first. Vision Zero stresses to protect vulnerable road users, such as pedestrians or cyclists, but also drivers and passengers as well. So it's not one group or the other. And I feel sometimes in the discourse around Vision Zero, it's often, oh, this is about cyclists versus drivers or pedestrians versus cars. And it's not that. It's really the vision of a cohesive system where nobody has to be battling each other for space. And it's not one group or the other, but it's everybody together kind of moving through a system safely. So it really does transform, this concept transforms what we typically have right now as a behavioral problem, where all the onus is on drivers to drive well, to not speed, to not drive dangerously, for pedestrians to cross in the right spots, for cyclists to be wary of other users, all of these other things that we're often blaming individuals for. But we have to understand we're all people and people make mistakes, right? So we need to transform this behavioral problem into a design problem. And that's really the foundation of where the action comes in, from the policy to the practice. So I like to think of it as Vision Zero being that kind of the bedrock, the framework, and then Complete Streets is the design solution. And together that creates a safe system. So you're taking the traditional levels of policy and engineering, you're layering in the urban planning or rural planning and urban design. And then all of that together reduces speeds, improves safety, increases awareness for drivers and pedestrians and cyclists, and you create that safe system. So at its core, at the very step one, Vision Zero is a policy innovation, right? So everyone, no matter what industry you work in, right, or study or anything, everyone is guided by some form of policy, and our road systems are no different, right? So Vision Zero policies are just one step. What they essentially do is, like I've been saying, that the traditional approach is that traffic deaths are inevitable, but a Vision Zero policy frames that to traffic deaths are preventable. Instead of expecting perfect human behavior, we understand that humans will fail. Instead of trying to prevent collisions, we try to prevent fatal and serious crashes, because at some point, collisions will happen. You will have that rear end collision, bumper to bumper, like those small accidents that occur. But the trick is to make sure that those most serious collisions, the ones that happen at intersections and the most vulnerable places in our system, don't result in death and serious injury. And again, it transforms that individual responsibility to a systems responsibility. And the last piece is we often think of all of these investments as being expensive, but we need to, in some areas, we like say public health, that we understand that saving lives is not expensive. In transportation, we feel it's expensive. So there needs to be that shift and that understanding that all of these systems kind of work together. If our transportation system is increasingly putting strain on our hospitals, that adds more cost down the road for treatment and rehab and all of these things that add up and strain our system. So I hope that makes sense. Basically, all of these things need to be matched together across disciplines in order to be effective in practice. So what challenges do we face? Like I said, we're currently limited by the approach to road safety in Canada. Priority right now is traditionally given to roadway capacity, to throughput, which is how many vehicles you can get through the system in a given amount of time, and efficiency, how fast those vehicles go through, how short the delay is. And unfortunately, just through the practice of traffic engineering and transportation planning, the safety of people is often an afterthought, and the studies really focus on that level of service and the delay. And like you see in that graphic at the top from the TAC manual, it's more about comparing different types of collisions rather than can we design this intersection to prevent the collisions from happening in the first place, right? Maybe that should be a four-way stop and all vehicles should be stopping rather than risking these T crashes, right? And to take it a step back, just based on my own experiences, walking through Canadian cities and small towns and suburban communities. Like I grew up in Mississauga, very suburban community. Now it's urbanizing a bit more, adding density, but it's still the built form and the density is still very suburban, right? Now I'm currently living in Toronto, and I'm living car free, which is in one of the few areas of the city where it's possible. But the fact of the matter is that there are so many areas in Toronto, in Mississauga, in Kingston, and Windsor, and pretty much any municipality or jurisdiction in Canada or North America where just the existence of a sidewalk does not correlate with pedestrian access or walkability. Because in my opinion, pedestrian access and being able to say an area is walkable, it means it has to be safe, right? But you're often walking in some communities and safety is always top of your mind. Am I going to get hit by a car? Is somebody going to pull out of this driveway? This sidewalk is really narrow. What if a cyclist crosses me in the other direction? And even in the city, in Toronto, you can be walking along busy roads, along arterials, to and from transit stops and across wide intersections with 6-7 lanes in some places, and it's not safe. And I wouldn't consider those areas to be walkable just because they have sidewalks. Because you often have vehicles speeding by with no protection for pedestrians. And that protection is where the safety comes in. Designing the network and that road link with protection for all users is how you create a safer system in line with Vision Zero principles. So one thing we know, and the reason I keep mentioning vehicle speed and how fast vehicles are going and making it feel unsafe is we know that when people are struck at higher and higher speeds, the likelihood of surviving the crash diminishes greatly, right? So unfortunately, the measures that we need to implement are not already ingrained in the engineering manuals and a lot of the policy that is typically used when reconstructing a roadway, repaving a link or expanding infrastructure. A lot of our manuals and standards were designed for another era. And just one example on the bottom right there is we have a transit shelter and a sidewalk, but it's within what we would call in traffic engineering the clear zone, where you're expecting if a vehicle loses control, that's where they're supposed to land. They're supposed to jump off the short curb because that curb is not very high, and then land where that bus shelter is before the trees to prevent the driver from getting hurt or crashing into another vehicle. Then who's using that space? It's pedestrians, it's transit users, it's usually the most vulnerable people using that space, vulnerable people on our roadways. And that doesn't just logically, that doesn't make sense, right? So Vision Zero principles would mean, if you're applying them, it means, how are you protecting the users of the bus stop? How are you protecting pedestrians? And they're one and the same, because we know that every transit ride starts and ends with a walk, right? So pedestrians, transit users, a lot of cyclists are all, you can kind of group them into one group called vulnerable road users. But there are kind of nuances for each. So on one hand, we're constrained by the standards, and on the other hand, we're constrained by good quality data for study and design. It's not easy to get information on vehicle speeds on the link across a period of time, and we don't necessarily share the information that we need to monitor our solutions. So oftentimes something is put in place, is constructed quickly or slowly, depending on how complicated the project is, and then it's done, and the funding is not available, or the information is not provided to monitor the solution to see, hey, did my design actually increase safety, or did it make things worse, or is it everything kind of the same, right? And that key piece of what doesn't get measured doesn't get addressed. And that seems to be, at least in my experience, an issue in the industry where we're pushing up projects and very little focus is put on like the after effects of that project. So what I would suggest overall is understanding these challenges, right? Understanding the current approach, understanding the constraints and standards and data. The first step is a mental shift, and that's what Vision Zero really calls for: shifting your thought process on who deserves the priority in the production and where the cost should go. And is it for the safety of people in a 2-ton steel box, or safety for vulnerable users who have that 2-ton steel box hurtling towards them? And we need to realize that a runaway car can be stopped on a street with protection closer to the curb without killing someone on the sidewalk. And we need to go back to those engineering standards like clear zones, breakaway designs where a car can hit a light fixture, and the light fixture is meant to topple onto the sidewalk rather than toppling onto the roadway. All of these features we have already in our built environment that ensure that drivers don't get harmed, but very little thought is put on the safety of the unprotected people who might be in the way of a falling post or a runaway car. So to truly make progress, improve livability and community health, we need to shift the mentality of who needs to be safe. And it's not just about prioritizing speed, but it needs to be from vehicles to people, flipping the script. So where are our opportunities? I believe that the next stage in Vision Zero and safe systems is going to be a data-driven approach. We know that people make mistakes, but we need to be able to measure those mistakes. We need to be able to track them and be able to respond accordingly. We need to be able to leverage big data and leverage forecasts to determine, okay, we know the characteristics of this roadway. We know it's going to be unsafe. If there hasn't been a collision yet, it's inevitable. And we need to leverage that information to make some changes. And it requires the time, effort of professionals to look at every element of that system, understanding the likelihood of human error and user vulnerability, right? So it's a really multidisciplinary approach. It's not just transportation planners like myself or traffic engineers or policymakers. It's really everybody coming together, bringing in their different perspectives to make those changes. In school zones, you should bring in educators and public education experts, as well as child behavior specialists who understand how kids will go from A to B, right? And bringing in those different expertise and understandings to help design the best school zone, like road network around the school zone, that pays dividends in that kind of environment. So the main opportunity here is building it and finding support within strong foundations and partnerships. When you have those partnerships, you can monitor, you can adapt strategies, And then system designers can implement best practices that reduce the likelihood of severe collisions. And at the end of the day, the ultimate success of Vision Zero is that continued advancement of technologies like big data and monitoring and adaptive solutions and technologies to eliminate the death and serious injuries from our roads. And we can leverage, one more point is we can leverage like AI learning and predictive algorithms as a layer in that, but that might take some more time to kind of incorporate in our process as that technology continues to grow and develop. So what can we do? I think I've already reiterated this, but essentially we need to flip the script, look at the whole system and not a series of parts. So we need to look at data collection, policy planning, infrastructure design, the tracking of treatments, and proactive enforcement. All of those together will create safer systems. So we'll get into some more specifics, but essentially for the responsibility on different stakeholders, like planners need to be updating policies, engineers need to be updating their standards for infrastructure design. Different partners need to share and make accessible more forms of data that can be used to interpret solutions. Expanding the field to healthcare workers who can update their systems and share how many injuries and deaths that they're tracking as a result of roadway collisions. Right now, at least in traffic engineering, you collect police reports that track collisions on the network, but those don't often match up with hospital reports for the same thing in the same jurisdiction. So kind of getting all of these data sets to match so we can get a full, complete understanding of what our system looks like in order to have that kind of leverage to take it to the decision makers to invest in the solutions. So I mentioned data gathering. It's a fundamental point for pretty much fundamental starting point for pretty much any study, whether you're in policy planning, in traffic engineering, working on road standards or network expansion. Data feeds into everything, and bad data, if you start with bad data, you're going to get bad results. So leveraging better technologies and bigger data sets can improve how we approach and then respond to these situations. So right now, traditionally, like I said, we get police reports for collisions and we get turning movement counts at different intersections. But one thing we're often missing is accurate pedestrian and cyclist flows on different lane nodes and network, and particularly near miss data. So what near miss data is at intersections where two cars or a car and a cyclist almost hit each other, but one just manages to avoid the collision and then continue moving forward, or a pedestrian that just gets misses getting hit by a car. We often only get reports on the actual serious and fatal collisions that make it to a police report or to a hospital report. But that near miss data often can precede the actual event, right? If you have a concentration of near misses, it's inevitable that at some point somebody might get killed at that intersection. So what we can do, and the availability of data is starting to grow, where you can collect near miss data from vehicle sensors, pull it into data sets, and then use that in your Vision Zero analysis. I've said a lot so far about policies and standards. So like the engineer, as a planner, you can say a lot of things, but if the engineering standards that the end roadway designer is going to leverage to construct the infrastructure expansion, if those are not updated, then your plans kind of fall short. At some point, they get diluted over and over again. And the implementation of safe systems becomes limited. And it's really a need for all professional partners to actively work and proactively update our auto-oriented infrastructure standards. So just one example I have on the slide here, and I should caveat this saying that this project is in progress. It is only in draft form, and this is not the final design. But looking at an arterial road right-of-way design in the city of Oshawa, as part of their engineering design manual standards. One thing we did is we looked at the current configuration and narrowed the road lanes to the minimum required, rather than, we know that wider lanes encourages more speeding, encourages faster travel. So narrowing the lane widths, including a requirement for a multi-use pathway. And we made additional recommendations to change intersection designs for more protected designs, as well as tightening curve radii, which slope vehicles as they're turning across sidewalks and conflicting users. So all of these things, it might not be a revolutionary change. Many of you might be looking at the slide saying, hey, it looks really much the same. Like, this is not like what I see in the Netherlands. This is not what I see in other parts of the world. Why are we still designing it this way? But we need to understand that our changes to standards also need to be context specific, right? If you're going to come out there as a bull and say everything needs to change and no more cars and you're not going to make a lot of partners, and you're not going to make a lot of progress, right? So context specific change, understanding where is the roadway located, what is the built form around the roadway, and how can I make incremental change over time to lead to the broader success of a safe systems adoption. Now, the next kind of step in updates needed, I would say, in policy and guidelines is traffic impact assessments. Now, I've done a lot of work in traffic engineering and TISs, and they always focus on vehicular level of service and delay, and what is acceptable for that development or that link or that corridor study, and then measures to improve the vehicular level of service, the amount of vehicles that can move through that link in a given peak hour, and reducing the delay for vehicles as much as possible. Now, unfortunately, there's very little effort put into, well, what about the pedestrian and cyclist and transit level of service and delay? Now, this is not across the whole industry. For example, in York Region, we have MMLOS guidelines, which are multimodal level of service guidelines, which look at transit and cyclist and pedestrian experiences. But I would critically say that there is a need to tie those results to vehicular infrastructure. So, for example, if a pedestrian level of service at X intersection is a C, right, like, or a D, like a failing grade, that should automatically trigger road safety improvements and traffic calming measures on that roadway link in order to balance the experience for all modes. Because if right now you could be reporting a bad experience or bad level of service, but then there's not really a trigger that requires the investment into that infrastructure to improve the scenario, to improve the situation. So what I would recommend here is that those kind of triggers and business cases need to be embedded into the approvals process with respect to TIAs and similar studies across the industry, because we can't really make the improvements into transit and sustainable modes and reallocate the funds without that kind of engineering math behind the scenes, right? So rather than a study suggesting that, hey, we need an additional, like a second left turn lane at this intersection because it's too slow for drivers to make that turn, but it comes at the expense of a failing grade for pedestrians, maybe there's a balance that's needed to kind of shift modes, improve safety, and reduce the risk of death and severe injury. Now, the next few slides, I'm going to be looking at a few different levels of transportation planning kind of projects. So at a very high level, you have transportation master plans, secondary plans, and like precinct master plans. And on the slide here, we see an example of Lakeview Village Development Master Plan in the city of Mississauga. So what we did is, as part of the process in designing the network, we proactively layered the different modes in such a way to protect circulation, minimize conflict points, and reduce the risk of severe collisions. So this was done through consistent road widths, fewer and narrowed vehicle lanes compared to what you would see if this was placed in a different area in a different municipality, you might have larger roads and more lanes to accommodate the traffic. But this was planned with fewer lanes, reduced curb radii, which slows vehicles when they're turning at intersections. It also includes separated and protected active transportation facilities. And you see this green spine and the east-west kind of T crossing here. And these are dedicated pedestrian kind of, I would almost call it a pedestrian highway. In addition to sidewalks and facilities and bike lanes across the network, you also have these areas where people can go without really interacting with cars for the majority of their experience. And then also shorten crossing distances, leveraging curb bump outs and other infrastructure to tighten the intersections and make those kind of Vision Zero principles kind of find their way into practice and design. Now, I would say it's not an easy process. There are roadblocks to success, and the underlying municipal approval, traffic engineering kind of expectations are one, as well as kind of navigating with emergency services. How are they going to navigate a tighter network with smaller radii and so forth? And that's where some flush curbs and things come into play, getting more into specifics. But at the end of the day, what I recommend is if you're working on something like this, use these measures as best practices to tackle and reverse the limitations we already find in the engineering stage. And that's how you can start making those steps from policy to practice. Getting more kind of into a granular stage, we can look at a project I worked on in Thunder Bay's North Core, which was a waterfront streetscape design project along with an urban design firm. And what we did is we applied a complete streets approach, and that provided an opportunity for urban planning, urban design, and engineering to collaborate together on a safe system during the detailed design phase. So this included speed management tools like lower speed limits, reduced lane widths, and enhanced pavement markings. It included horizontal deflection measures, such as curb bump outs at different intersections, speed tables, and speed bumps along local roads. Sorry, that's a mix. I'm getting myself a bit mixed up. Horizontal deflection, like curb bump outs, chicanes, street furniture, and trees along the main arterial and collector roads, and vertical deflection measures like raised crosswalks, speed tables, and speed bumps on local roads in order to reduce speeds and kind of make the entire North Core a more traffic calmed and safer location. So the resulting roadway design would cohesively integrate traffic calming measures from curb to curb, which, as you're entering the zone of the precinct, it triggers driver awareness to slow down and to understand that there are many different users within this downtown, and it helps improve the safety for everybody. What I would say is, as part of the process, more education is needed for industry professionals across a range of professions in order to understand the reasons why some of these measures are introduced, to help guide the practice and to inform new standards. So oftentimes what I would recommend to my fellow professionals is, if you're proposing measures like these, back it up with the reasons why, tie it to Vision Zero, tie it to other best practice examples, and it kind of gives a bit more weight other than, hey, we need to lower the speed limit. And what I find is it helps kind of make that change happen. I said this a few minutes ago, but all transit trips start and end with a walk. So understanding that the goal of Vision Zero is to eliminate serious injury and death, we had an opportunity through the previous project, the Streetscape design, to tackle kind of the source of the problem, which is ultimately the influx of cars that within downtown cores and areas that are meant to be pedestrian, cyclist, transit oriented. The previous study identified a lack of complementary infrastructure in the study area to significantly support the desired mode shift, which led to this study for a transit and mobility hub at the gateway into Thunder Bay's North Core. Now, you might be wondering, how does a transit mobility hub tie to Vision Zero? Through the process, we identified opportunities to leverage this triangular plot of land, which is at what the city suggests is the gateway into the core, to interrupt traffic flows, slow speeds entering into the core, and also at the same time centralize the transit terminal to encourage more of a modal shift onto transit and after transportation, and reduce the demand for drivers entering the core. So the narrowed lane widths, the traffic calming measures, enhanced pedestrian crossings and connections between the transit hub and the nearby parking facility. All of these measures work together to improve safety for all users, slow speeds in the core. Slow speeds in the core, and mitigate the risk of serious collisions in the precinct in alignment with Vision Zero goals. One thing I should mention is that drivers will naturally slow down approaching a transit terminal because they know that there's going to be a lot of people crossing the street and trying to access buses and transfer between modes. So making that the gateway into your smaller north core, it helps create a traffic calm environment, which should hopefully, with a number of other measures within the Streetscape study, reduce the risk of collisions and fatal ones at that. Now, getting even another layer into granularity, looking at a site-specific development design. We know that intersections are the most dangerous areas for collisions, and that includes site driveways and entrances. But a safe systems design considers that all modes have dedicated facilities and connections through a site and are safely accommodated. So this example is from a development proposed currently in progress through development applications in the city of Ottawa. And it includes elements to calm traffic and reduce the risk of collisions with vulnerable users. So there's a daycare located on site, and we really wanted to make sure that the entrance and where children are being dropped off is safe. So a number of measures were implemented, including a raised continuous sidewalk and cycle lane, curb extensions and a protected intersection design, additional bollards and planters, additions of street furniture, a raised mixed-use path with protective landscaping and flushed curbs. And all of these combine to alert drivers, as well as tactile surface treatment. All of these work together to alert drivers to a multi-use environment. It forces people to slow their speed, forces people in all modes to be more attentive, right? But whether you're pedestrian stepping out into the intersection or into the driveway, or you're a driver or delivery truck driver, all of these work together to improve the design, creating a safer system. And this might not feel like it's Vision Zero, but even reducing collisions on site driveways and entrances, that still contributes to the larger policy and framework of traffic deaths are preventable. And I will mention in future stages, there are opportunities to include pedestrian signal priority, enhanced lighting, signage, and additional pavement markings to further enhance and kind of set in stone that traffic calmed roadway lane. Now, I'll kind of speed through this because I think I discussed it at length earlier, but the opportunity to leverage big data to proactively monitor communities is critically important, because we can use big data and larger anonymized data sets to study corridors based on speed, their road design and build form, and we can proactively target measures to improve network safety. Rather than waiting for tragedies to occur, we can get ahead of the curve, beat that roadblock, and improve our built environment. I would say the main obstacle in this path is funding for these proactive reviews. Often you only get funding after there's been some tragedies, and then there's a study launched to improve safety on X and Y corridors. But we need to be more proactive with this rather than reactive, and that should lead to more proactive enforcement as well. So when it comes to enforcement, what I really mean is the enforcement, first and foremost, is speed limits and safe driving. But we know that speed limits and enforcing slower speeds is critical to the success of a safe systems design. You can design the most traffic calm roadway link, but if people are still speeding through it and there's no enforcement, no kind of penalty to doing so, you're not going to have much success in the long term. So enforcement is as critical as that design phase. We know that a 10 km/h reduction in speed exponentially increases your chance of surviving a crash. Now, obviously, we can't have police all over the city at all times monitoring all roadways, which is why a technology called automated speed enforcement is a proven solution to actively monitor and enforce roadway speeds. And it directly issues tickets to offenders. I'm sure some of you may have seen cameras in your cities, especially in Toronto. They have an ongoing ASC pilot program where they have 50 cameras circulating through different locations in the city. And a study of the City of Toronto's pilot program by partners at Toronto Metropolitan University, Hospital for Sick Kids, York University, and others found that neighborhoods with these cameras experience a tangible reduction in their 85th percentile speeds after an interim warning period. So it suggested that the presence of cameras alerted drivers to, hey, if I speed, I will get a ticket. And there's no leeway with a police officer or the chance of a police officer not being there, but there's a camera there that will automatically trigger and issue me a ticket if I speed in this community. And the early results suggest that ASC is an effective component of Vision Zero programs to reduce speeding. We know drivers will slow down if there are immediate repercussions. And I would encourage all partners who have that kind of tool in their toolkit to start implementing it to the largest extent possible, especially around school zones, community safety zones, which are where they're currently permitted, but also beyond that, to areas where we have too many collisions, too many deaths, arterial roadways, rural roadways. It doesn't just have to be in a city center. Now, kind of harping on what I've been saying a few times, but the professional advocacy and partnerships is really important to advancing Vision Zero. So presentations like this, not harping on myself, but as professionals, it's our job to kind of engage more and more people in the importance of our work, and also in voicing support for Vision Zero policies and measures in our communities. If your community where you live, you might not be working there. If you are working there, it might not be appropriate to comment. But if a proposal comes out and there's a public meeting, go voice your support, and make it known that you support safer streets, traffic calming measures, and a 30-second increase to your commute because you have to slow down around a few extra streets is not going to be the end of the world. And then building partnerships, like I mentioned public health earlier, but they really are kind of untapped resource within Vision Zero planning and design, because they have such a stake in the results of our work, where if we're not doing our jobs well, they're feeling the strain in the health system, and having their input, having their support, and they carry a lot of political weight as well to help advance solutions. So I recommend to my partners and colleagues on the call, connect with a broader range of partners in order to push your work. And I'll skip this because I've already said it a few times, but the way forward is really redesign our roadway for safety, reallocate space for mobility, reinvest in alternatives for sustainability, and as a result, we can reprioritize human lives for visibility. So at the end of the day, a safe system is one where the built environment and road infrastructure is designed to protect all users so that an accident becomes an accident rather than a commonality in our daily life. And with that, I would like to thank you all so much for your time, for your ears and your attention. And I'd like to open it up for any questions and comments. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Amar. That's given us lots of food for thought. And I know there's a lot of people on who are advocates for safe systems and Vision Zero. So there are some that you've been preaching to the choir too, but I think, as you said, there's some that are new to it. So I'm hoping that they've gained some new knowledge about those approaches. So I'm just going to jump right in because we do have a
Mhm.
number of questions. It's been quite active in the Q&A and also in the chat area. So I'm just going to start with the first one. Do you think the authorities and decision makers must enforce strong regulations standards for design of roadways?
Short answer is yes. We have a lot of policies that recommend these, but very little kind of hard measures that require them. So enforcement of standards as well as enforcement of users is definitely necessary. I'll keep my answer short and sweet so you could kind of fly through these if that's okay.
Yeah, good
And if
idea.
anybody
Yeah.
wants, if anybody wants more information, you can either pull up another question or feel free to contact me as well. I'll do my best to go through as many as we can.
Okay, perfect. Next question. Road safety audits and black spot recognition with mitigations must be made mandatory for all new and existing roadways. What are your views on this?
So I'm not quite familiar with black spot recognition, but I agree that road safety audits should be conducted anytime a new link is created, anytime the infrastructure is expanded. It should be part of the planning and study to understand, is that going to be safe? Is that going to contribute to any issues? What elements of the design need to be implemented to ensure that when we build it, it's safe, rather than build it quickly using the existing standards and then do an audit afterwards to see if it's safe. And I think sometimes we kind of leave it to later to figure it out afterwards. But we need to be more proactive as professionals to include that in a scope. If you're being scoped for a roadway expansion, include the road safety audit in your scope, and make that kind of the habit going forward.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. This one's more of a comment. It's no system is foolproof. Safe systems requires road users to be able to respond to failures in the system. This means road users, drivers, and pedestrians still need to be responsible. And this comment relates to a slide that stated the system is responsible, not the individual. So actually, I'll ask what are your thoughts on that view?
I appreciate the feedback. So I agree. It's not just, and maybe I need to revise that slide going forward, that it's not removing responsibility from the individual, but it's adding it to the system as well. So it's not removing an individual driver or pedestrian's responsibility. Yes, you still need to drive safely. Yes, you still need to be aware when you're crossing. You shouldn't be heads down crossing an intersection on your phone, not paying attention, right? So I'll take that as great feedback to revise that to make sure it's clear that it's individual and system responsibility, not one or the other. Thank you,
Okay.
Piero.
Okay, perfect. The next one is traffic impact studies must have independent road safety audit teams which oversee the design and proposals by traffic engineers with consideration of road safety. What are your views?
I agree. Not everybody who can conduct the traffic impact study has the necessary expertise for a road safety audit. So bringing in those professionals, whether they're colleagues within your own organization or external, bringing in those professionals to do that road safety audit as part of the larger study is a great idea. And if that's not a possibility, then training your team to be able to do those as part of traffic impact studies. They can be independent, but they don't. I think the flaw is when somebody's doing it that doesn't know what they're doing. But if they're trained well and they're capable, either bringing in a third party or in-house is really important.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I had another question that talks about post-crash management. And I just wondered if that is ever brought into the whole planning exercise. And his particular question says, any light on post-crash management? I think having a good post-crash system also might help save lives. And yeah, I just wondered if that is ever considered in the planning of complete streets or a neighborhood.
I would say in terms of the management of the after effects, I would say no. That hasn't been kind of, I think the focus is so much on just getting that design right and figuring out how to monitor. So I would suggest, yes, that's something that needs to be advanced. I'm not going to say I have the answer to that one, but Saeed, I see you're the one who put that in there. Let's have a chat and let's see what that means going forward.
Okay, and I have one more here. It's to do with basically winter and snow. And it
Okay.
says, you talk a lot about narrowing streets to slow cars down. What about in the winter time? If you don't have a way to remove the snow, it basically chokes the road. And he just said the driving public still tries to drive the road. Anyway, just wondered if you had any comments on that.
I think part of it is lane management. So let's say you have a roadway that's 3 lanes in each direction. Perhaps part of that, the curb lane is utilized for snow management in certain periods until it can be cleared away. Typically during a storm, you'd have fewer vehicles on a road. I think that the answer to that is very context specific, where it's not just because every roadway form is a little bit different. Like let's say you're in a more urban area, you have on-street parking. Maybe those parking spaces can be utilized for snow storage temporarily until it can be cleared from the roadway. Maybe you're leveraging other infrastructure, like you have land. Part of your network is providing for like on-street patios, right? Like through the summer, and maybe those patio zones are converted into snow storage in the winter, because nobody's really going out onto a patio outside on the roadway to eat during a snowstorm, right? We're Canadian, we're not all going to do that. So I think it's really context specific, but I don't think that we can just use snow and ice as a reason to not make the changes that we need, because there are enough examples of like in Sweden and Norway and other countries that have snow that are able to make these changes and make them well.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I don't see, oh, actually, yes, there is still another question here. Oh, actually, there's a couple. Okay. What federal policies would you advise be changed in the interest of Vision Zero?
That's a good question. I don't know about federal policies. I'm not an expert in federal policies. I would say provincially, there needs to be more enforcement of provincial standards and guidelines, transforming some guidelines into requirements rather than just suggestions. And certainly in municipalities, I don't know about federal standards, unfortunately, not off the top of my head. Other than, I would say, the TAC Manual, Transportation Association of Canada, which is a guidebook that traffic engineering uses when designing roadways and conducting studies. That definitely needs to be updated. And I believe an update is in progress, but I don't know how maybe prescriptive it will be. So maybe once that comes out, it's another update to that. So that might be like a national standard that needs to be updated. But in terms of specific federal policies, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. I have another one, and I think we just have time for one more.
Okay.
How is the star ratings for design being mandated in Canada as a part of the United Nations target to achieve 3 stars or better roadways by 2030?
Long story short, I don't know if the star rating is being mandated in Canada. I don't think it is. And if it might be one of those suggestions that's missed by most of the industry. I personally haven't used it. So that's something I need to personally look into. So I appreciate that you bringing that to this platform. Yeah. I don't have an answer to that. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. No, and you've given us lots of food for thought, and unfortunately that is wraps us up. We're coming on to 1 o'clock, so I just want to thank you again for a very stimulating and interesting and cool animation. Appreciate that. Makes it really interesting to watch. And thanks again
Thank
for
you so much.
great webinar.
Thank you
And
so much,
happy
Brenda.
holidays to everybody, and stay safe.
Thank you, everybody, and
Thank
happy holidays.
Thank you.